Well guys, it finally happened. I finally got behind the wheel of a Mercedes for the channel. Being the first time ever, and me being a complete spaz with no sense of self-control, I immediately took it to some of the most cliche spots that I could think of. Starting with a monthly German car show here in Atlanta, and then I took it to one of the wealthiest shopping districts in the entire city, so I could sort of play pretend as if I belong there. I know. It's pathetic. I'm a complete dumbass. What's going on, everyone? Jax here, and today I have the 2021 Mercedes GLB 35 AMG. Okay, let me come clean. I might have been a little too excited to finally crack
the Germans.
I've been wanting to test some German vehicles for you guys for the past 2 years, so I might have gone a little overboard with this initial opportunity. So I went down to the monthly German Auto Syndicate show in my German car, which in my defense was the only German SUV in the entire show. You know, the German show, the all-German show. Oh, okay, it's a mostly German show. All right, it's a European show, more or less. Germany's part of Europe. It's a European show, you know, open to all. Well, I mean, America came from Europe when you kind of think about it that way, so like it has some American stuff too. Right, even if some of the cars aren't powered by combustion engines. Okay, fine. It's just a cool car show that just happens to be hosted by a sort of German auto club.
I respectfully refuse.
Then after the completely German auto show, and not even remotely on my way home, I went by the Avalon, where some of Atlanta's richest people eat, shop, play, and plan swingers parties.
You are so money and you don't even know it.
Because I wanted to see if I blended in. And guess what? I didn't at all. But you know who did? The little Mercedes AMG. It looked right at home as we cruised down the main strip past the McLarens and the Rolls Royces and the girls named Madison. But enough about all that. Enough about me being a poser. Let's get on with the review. I think from a styling standpoint, first impressions of the GLB 35 are gonna be kind of like mixed for most people. Mrs. Jax didn't really like it at all. But to be honest, there's a functionality to the look of it that has sort of grown on me over the past week. I think at the end of the day, I kind of prefer the sort of slammed traditional two-box SUV design as opposed to the sort of SUV coupe craze, which was ironically started by the Germans. It makes the interior far more useful, something we'll cover later. And in a weird way, I think it makes the AMG trim look a little bit more instantly special, kind of differentiating it from the regular GLB 250. Many of us sort of enthusiasts fawn over what I would call super wagons, like the Audi RS6 Avant. But I think in this SUV-crazed world, sort of slammed two-box SUVs might be as close as we ever get to those sort of crazy rocket sled wagons like the old CTS V-Wagon or the Mercedes E-Class AMG model wagon. Your impressions will no doubt vary, and they will be based on your own personal sort of tastes. But for me, I would have this over the more rounded GLA every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Under the hood is a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder making 302 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque, all running through an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission. Power reaches the ground through Mercedes' 4MATIC all-wheel drive system, which features torque vectoring. And even though this little porker weighs nearly 3,900 pounds, with launch control in Sport Plus mode, it can still hit 60 in about 5.1 seconds.
Terrible.
It's the same basic powertrain as the GLA 35, which means the upcoming GLB 45 will probably feature the GLA 45's utterly insane 382 horsepower turbocharged 4-cylinder, which is just deliciously ridiculous. And I believe, at least at the time of recording this video, it is the most powerful 4-cylinder engine in the world. So is the 35 fast? Well, as you'll see in the driving portion, it's not like mind-blowingly quick, but it's quick enough to be entertaining and leave most similarly sized vehicles in its dust. Inside, you get what is quickly becoming Mercedes' sort of ubiquitous small car interior. With dual 10.3-inch screens, sort of turbine-style AC vents, and AMG's absolutely delightful steering wheel. With its little drive mode select dial with the little screen on it. That's just cool. I know it's a gimmick, but it's just cool. Honestly, this interior looks great, it feels even better, and it offers a pretty insane amount of usable space. Cargo space is a very usable 22 cubic feet behind the second row. Fold that second row down and you get a cavernous, for the size, 62 cubic feet of cargo space. And I can practically sit behind myself, which is frankly phenomenal in such a small vehicle. Tech is, of course, here in spades, with crystal clear digital gauges displaying a wealth of information right in front of the driver. And this particular model came with Mercedes' augmented reality navigation system, which displays floating text and directions on top of a front camera view of the road. Are there any strikes? Well, at over 60 grand as tested, it should have freaking cooled seats. And on that note, the AC was sort of adequate in this sort of Georgia end of summer climate. Last weekend, it was in the mid-90s during the day, and I had to keep the AC at its lowest setting just to keep up with the insane outside temperature. So it will cool the car down, but it's definitely sort of like, oh, this isn't Germany, and it's not really doing it as quickly as some American cars, which will blow a blizzard into your face because they know that half of this country endures these kind of temperatures. Well, like most of this country endures these kind of temperatures now. There were some squeaks and creaks, which I will forgive because of the insane temperature swings. It was just ridiculously hot during my week with the car. And the optional Burmeister sound system sounds really good. It really fills the cabin and sounds very premium. I don't know anything about audio fidelity, I've said that numerous times, but it just sounded really good. That's my technical review. Oh, and also the ambient lighting effects are just kind of a nice touch. They're highly customizable. You can set them into a range of colors and sort of like custom settings. Like I have this one set to like fire mode or something, which alternates between like red, yellow, and orange. And it's just kind of it's a really nice premium touch in a relatively lavish cabin for this class of vehicle. You will pay for all of that, of course. It's a Mercedes after all. So here we are behind the wheel of the Mercedes GLB 35 AMG. I do apologize if the air noise is present because it's extremely hot in Georgia. I'm filming this, if you can believe it, in the early evening, and it's about 93 degrees outside, so yeah. Now, the GLB 35 is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. First of all, when they dropped it off, I had no opinion about it whatsoever. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I was sort of coming into this blind. I had never even really considered the AMG version of the GLB. I have begrudgingly accepted our SUV future as we all sort of march towards that inevitable conclusion. And to me, the GLB was just another one of the very many kind of luxury SUVs that's come out recently. But I was kind of surprised during my time with the GLB because obviously in AMG trim, you expect a certain amount of performance. You expect this thing to get up and move, to be a little bit playful. Yes, it's only the 35. Supposedly the GLB 45 is coming, and that's gonna have the crazy 380 horsepower turbo 4 from the GLA 45, which to me that's just nuts. But this car has a lot of the AMG enthusiasm combined with a surprising level of sort of everyday practicality. For example, I've got it set in comfort mode right now, and the ride is quite German nice. It is firm and controlled, and somehow still able to take the edge off of unpleasant pavement. I've complained in the last couple of videos that some of the roads around my house are being repaved or eventually repaved. And so they're all kind of pothole marked with patches and stuff. The ride's terrible over them. And this car, with its sort of firm suspension in comfort mode, feels really pleasant over those terrible roads. But then you switch it over to sport mode or sport plus mode, and everything kind of firms up in an impressive way. Sport plus is even a tad aggressive. I wouldn't say too aggressive. I don't think the performance capabilities of this thing are that high, but it's definitely more aggressive than you would leave it in normally. So we're about to turn onto the handling road, and I'm gonna put it in sport mode because I really like sport mode a lot. So turning onto the handling road in sport mode, to me, this is sort of the ideal setup as an enthusiast. The engine gets a little bit noisier, the suspension firms up, the steering kind of gets a little heavier. I actually like the Sport Plus steering a little bit better, but the steering as a whole is quick off center, very direct. It feels really good. This AMG wheel, by the way, feels really good. But you notice over that first rough patch, there's still enough give in the suspension that you could drive it this way every day. We're going around the first corner. There's a little bit of lean in this. I was a little surprised that there was as much lean as there is, but not really any understeer in enthusiastic everyday driving. I'm sure on a racetrack you could provoke understeer. It is front wheel drive biased, but it does have the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system and torque vectoring. So in sort of day-to-day operation, you'd have to be kind of a loon to get to where it would actually understeer. I'm not gonna do that. Now, because we're in sport mode, we're approaching the big bump right here coming up, and yeah, like that's totally fine. You could totally drive this every single day and be perfectly happy, and it would not beat you up. Now, what might beat you up a little bit are these adaptive AMG seats. They're pretty cool, and I don't mean cool because this car does not have cooled seats, which at over $60,000, it should have cooled seats. Notice the little blank on the door right here, no cooled seats. It's an a la carte option, of course. But when you put it in Sport Plus mode, the seats get like pretty hard. They're like, oh, you want racing shells? Here you go. If you don't know, the AMG adaptive seats, they actually like firm up and relax based on how you are driving, which is pretty neat in both theory and practice because you can actually feel it happening, which is a little disconcerting, but it's kind of cool. However, in their firmer settings, they are pretty hard, and you can tailor them to do that or not do that. You can also tailor how long they'll do it for. I, in hindsight, would go back and say, hey, stop immediately when I'm done driving enthusiastically, because it's not super comfortable beyond the necessary body holding if you're going fast. If you're just driving this thing day to day, I'd probably switch it off. The throttle and brake feel is excellent. This is definitely a sort of driver-focused version of an everyday SUV. I really enjoy the steering in this car. It's surprisingly good for a front-wheel drive biased all-wheel drive system. There's not really any feel, but it is accurate, and I love the weighting on it. I really do. Likewise, the transmission, the 8-speed dual clutch, does a good job of apportioning the power and swapping between the ratios, especially in the sporty modes. I will say in comfort mode, it can be a little sluggish at times. It'll definitely defer to like, I'll just hold the gear and let the turbo spool up and eventually we'll get going kind of thing. That could be a little annoying, but other than that, it's pretty seamless and you don't really notice it in comfort. And in Sport Plus, it gives you pretty fast upshifts and downshifts. I wouldn't say it's like, you know, PDK quick, but it's definitely quick enough. Another thing from a driving standpoint that I didn't exactly expect to be so good was visibility. The sort of two-box SUV design yields really good visibility in every single direction. And it makes the cabin feel bright and airy, especially with this panoramic sunroof. I really like the fact that I could just turn my head, I could see everything. Now, I do wish this car had a surround view camera, but it is nice having this kind of visibility out of a car with sort of an enthusiastic performance intent. And I know I've already talked about it, but the technology in this car, one of the things that I think is so cool from a driver's perspective, because I've already talked about the technology a little bit, but you can control almost everything from the wheel. And the redundancies built into the control of the technology are really nice. You can control it via the trackpad down here. You can control it via the screen, which is actually a touch screen, and you can control it via these little touch pads on the wheel, and they work surprisingly well. I think that's where Mercedes is just in a kind of different league sometimes compared to other brands. The technology integration, not just into what it can do, but the ease with which you can control it is virtually unparalleled, especially in a sort of small everyday car. This isn't an S-Class. This is just a small performance SUV. Never thought those words would be like normal. Small performance SUV. Now, one thing I used quite extensively last weekend when I went down to that German car meet was the augmented reality navigation, which is not just a gimmick. It does come up on the screen. It does look kind of cool. My only complaint was that it wasn't always as quick to respond if the directions changed. I missed a turn one time because the augmented reality arrow came up like kind of right as the street became visible. And then it had a hard time like rerouting me. It kept throwing up the augmented reality arrow when it was like too late to actually make the turn safely. And so it's not perfect. It's a great idea. And I would use it. It's probably, I would say, the best system I would even consider ditching something like Waze or Google Maps for. But I'd probably still use Waze or Google Maps, to be honest with you. I think one of the overall impressions after a week with this car is this is a performance-oriented sort of vehicle, right? But it doesn't feel like an SUV. And maybe that's the point. You get a lot of the practicality benefits that you would associate with the SUV shape, right? The sort of two-box design. But you don't get very many penalties. And there's something appealing about that. Oh, and since we haven't really let the engine off the chain, let's do that. I like the little fart on the upshift. Bump. I'm sure that's being augmented sonically in some way, but it doesn't sound bad. We'll give it another go. See, there, it probably should have kicked down one more gear. That was in Sport Plus as well. It probably should have kicked down one more gear. We were going about 45, but you know what? That's why we have paddle shifters. Let's switch over to manual control. One thing I noticed in manual control is that will cut power before it visibly gets to the red line. We should have a little more theater on the downshifts though. Let's try upshift at 6. See if we can nail the sweet spot. There we go. Now, in case you didn't know, this car is supposed to hit 60 in just over 5 seconds. It feels appropriately quick, but honestly, I think the most impressive thing about the acceleration comes more in that mid-range. It comes more in the mid-range where the turbo's doing the work, and it gets up and moves. This car does weigh 3,900 pounds, so it ain't light. That little 4-cylinder is doing a lot of work here, but it's not slow. It's like just right. Kind of like a Goldilocks in between. And I dig that. Also, just FYI, we're going over this horrible surface road in Sport Plus, and it's not bad. Well, SUV future, maybe you won't be so bad after all. So should you buy a Mercedes GLB 35 AMG? Well, it certainly makes a good case for itself, to be honest with you. And it makes a good case for this sort of wild and strange SUV future that we're all heading into. Just think about it for a second. The GLB can easily carry a family of 4, a tallish family of 4, with plenty of room for their things and all the infotainment and connectivity they could want, as well as the assurance of a powerful engine running through a very competent all-wheel drive system. And for me personally, I prefer the upright stance of the GLB to the sort of amorphous blob of the GLA or the I accidentally forgot not to look like a Ford Escape GLC. In the same way that the GLE looks sort of purposeful, especially in AMG trim, while the GLE Coupe looks like something a couple who decorates with pineapples and leaves their keys in a bowl by the front door at parties would drive. At over 60 grand as tested, the GLB certainly isn't cheap. But for people who don't need the maximum amount of space available, the sort of combination of performance and practicality might prove enticing. Other than the minor irritation of not having cooled seats, this thing is loaded with technology, as well as enough performance to keep an enthusiast dad more than entertained for the week. And it's unique enough to be one of one at a German car show among a bunch of German car fanatics, as well as most other brands and countries, but forget all that. I personally think it looks a lot better than the BMW X2. It has more performance than the Audi Q3, and even though you could get a fully loaded Lexus UX for much, much cheaper, you could also probably get a rotting skunk carcass for much cheaper, so there's that too.
That doesn't make sense.
Your opinions aside, there's no getting around the fact that sort of do-everything runabout small SUVs will soon be the norm, probably replacing small cars entirely. And as an example of that sort of future class of vehicle, I think the GLB 35 sets a very high bar. Guys, I hope you like this video. It meant a lot to me to make it just because this was a first. It was my first German car. I know some of the big channels like the Straight Pipes and Throttle House, they get crazy awesome cars all the time. But for a sort of up and coming channel, this was sort of a big win for me. It made me feel kind of vindicated after 2 years of kind of grinding it out. So if you've made it this far in the video, please comment down below, what German car do you hope Jax gets next? So I'll know that you made it this far and I'll know that you care, and I thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you're in the market for a GLB 35, I think you'll find it surprisingly practical. Guys, until next time, ride safe, drive safe, and I will catch you in the next review. Peace. Oh yeah, drive down this row because there's not 4 other parking lot rows that you could have driven down. My God, does everybody have to drive right over here to wonder what I'm doing? Does it look like I'm doing something that doesn't require sound? forgive that guy who's driving a Corvette. Oh no, I've got a guy on a Harley behind me riding my bumper. The funny thing is, this car is faster than his dumb Harley. Oh hey, someone drove a Slingshot over there. That's next week's review. Polaris Slingshot. If you made it this far in the video, just comment Polaris Slingshot. I win, I made it this far. Thanks, Mom.